Well, as we've been discussing over the last couple of days, the issue of fuel security has long been a concern in Australia, but particularly a heightened one given the tensions in the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East. And we'll get to the discussions around whether Australia should be joining after the US request to join a global coalition to protect and patrol freedom of movement through the Strait of Hormuz. But when it comes to our fuel security here in Australia, we don't have enough to actually meet the international requirements that are placed on all countries. And the Energy Minister, Angus Taylor, has confirmed that Australia is now negotiating with the United States to access, in the case of a crisis, its vast fuel reserves. Well, someone who's long campaigned for Australia to do a whole lot more when it comes to fuel security, to get serious about this, is the former Liberal Senator Jim Molan, who joins me now. Thanks for your time this afternoon. You've, as I say, long argued we need to get serious about this. What do you think of the idea of buying access to fuel reserves in the United States as an answer to this?
I think it's a very, very good idea, and I totally support it, because the answer to this kind of contingency, and we can talk about what the contingency that is underlying this is. The answer to this kind of contingency is diversification of supply. And we've long had a fairly diversified supply situation.
So let's just spell that out. We've got 28 days stock in Australia, is that right?
The latest figures I've seen are that we've got a maximum of 23 days.
23 days?
Yes.
And then we buy the rest of our fuel from Singapore, largely?
No, that's the way that I look at it is that 60% of what we put in our tank each and every day is imported as already refined product.
Yes.
From overseas, a whole bunch of countries.
Yes.
The last 40% is produced by our 4 refineries in this country, but they're all fed 80% of what's the feedstock that goes into them comes from overseas. So the 60% that comes from other places, guess where they get their feedstock from? They get their feedstock. A lot of them get their feedstock from the Gulf as well. So we are, all in all, 90% dependent. So, and I totally agree with Minister Taylor that we should be allowed to count what's on the water as being ours, because the contingency that we're looking at in this situation is not a contingency where we are totally cut off. It's a contingency where a significant amount is cut off, and we can look in other areas.
But isn't the stock that's on the water at the moment, it's not necessarily ours? Some critics say, well, it is bought and sold while on the sea. So, the contracts move all the time. It's not guaranteed to be ours.
Well, yes, but once it is guaranteed to be ours, it should be counted. For example, in Europe, they've long been able to count what has entered the water systems within Europe. So, but I don't have the International Energy Agency requirements of 90 days. To me, is totally irrelevant. It's to do with a problem of flooding in Bangladesh or an earthquake in here or there. And I think what Angus Taylor is doing is tremendous in relation to this. That's what we've got to do. We've got to diversify as much as we can, and accessing the American stocks, which they no longer need as much because they're pretty well self-contained now in relation to gas. That's a great move. I'd love to see them go to the next step now.
And what's that?
The next step is really to at least plan for, don't have to spend a cent, at least plan for the increasing probability, small though it is now, that one day we may be cut off from the vast majority. That's a different issue. That's where this 23 days of stock comes in.
So what would that require? I know you're saying you don't need to spend a cent right now, but if we did go down that path, if we were cut off, what would we need?
We would be in big trouble, because even if we could move some of our own stocks of crude into our own refineries, we could only produce 40% of what we need on a day-to-day basis.
We'd run out pretty quick.
We'd run out pretty quick. And particularly if this was a situation where we've seen quite often around the eastern end of the Mediterranean, when Hezbollah fires missiles at ships that come in and out of Israel, no one insures those ships anymore. It's not beyond the realm of reason, but I agree it's a small probability. So
to have enough storage here would take what?
A ridiculous amount of money, and I wouldn't do it. What we've got to do is the study, the inquiry that Josh Frydenberg started, which Angus Taylor is continuing, must look at the relationship between how much we need to store and how much we could arc up in that period of time by increasing domestic production. But we can't do that David, until we do a national security strategy. The key to this is a national security strategy. Go back 2 days, we're looking at fuel. Go back another day, we're looking at gas. Go back another day, we're looking at electricity. We need a national security strategy.
And where's that? Where is that?
Well, you could do it. I could knock it out by tomorrow morning. Late tomorrow morning. give it to the government. We'll do it in 6 months.
OK, but the government doesn't seem to have a lot of urgency around the national security.
No, because, and I understand why. I mean, the government is doing great things in a lot of small areas, and I think I'd like to think it will move into that area because our strategic environment. You know, the day before yesterday, we were talking about China, for God's sake.
Exactly. It makes a lot of sense to have...
We need to pull all these things together in a coherent way.
Part of this whole debate too, what do you think of the idea yesterday from Nick Champion to nationalise the Port of Darwin, which was, as we know, sold or the deal done for a 99-year lease to the Chinese company Landbridge?
No, that's absolutely irrelevant and a silly thing to do. If we want the Port of Darwin back tomorrow, we can take it back tomorrow. But my advice would be, let's not take it back until the Chinese build $500 million worth of new wharves, which we couldn't build.
OK.
Well, the port is there. It ain't going away.
No, but right now it's not
within
a security
the agreement.
risk. The way it's operating right now is not a security risk.
No, it's not a security risk. This is not 1942, where the Japanese spies were looking at buildings and seeing what ships were going in and out of Pearl Harbor.
Was it a stupid deal, though?
It was a clumsily conducted deal. The only good thing about it is the $500 million, which I believe the Chinese are putting into it. The only other good thing was that it generated the Foreign Investment Review Board to totally change the way they do this thing. We then applied that to Huawei, to CKI's attempt to buy our $13 billion East Coast gas grid, and to one of the electricity.
But what's going on? Sorry, I'm fascinated by this. What's going on with the US talking about another port just outside Darwin? They're obviously upset about the Chinese ownership.
Well, I think we surprised them, and we don't. There's not much value in surprising.
But they'd want us to largely fund a new port, wouldn't they?
Well, no, I don't think so. Right. You know, what would you? We've got a port there which tomorrow we could take back. In the lease, there are take-back requirements. The CEO's got to be an Australian citizen. Majority of the board's got to be an Australian citizen. We could take the Port of Darwin back tomorrow if we wanted it.
OK, so there's not going to be another port built?
No, I don't think so. I'd rather use the money for moving water down in the Bradfield scheme.
Well, that's a whole other discussion. Jim Mollett, look, thank you. I know we were here to talk about fuel security, but always interesting to pick your brains on a few.
Thanks, David.
Appreciate your time.